Hey, it's Drybear. We've pushed well over 100 hours in the full release of The First Descendant, so I wanted to give a full review of the game and how it feels after this much time invested. And we're definitely hitting that point now, weeks after the full launch of the game, where we're starting to settle into what is going to be the core audience for the game as well. The people that have jumped into The First Descendant for its initial hype and excitement, and the fact that all their friends are playing it are now starting to fall off of the game because ultimately it's not the game that's for them. So let's talk about the specific audience that focuses on The First Descendant and what they can do over the next year or two to try and keep the game flowing and flourishing. Now, I think when it comes to games like this that are looter shooters, that are intentionally created to be long-term grind-based games where you're farming the same thing over and over. I see a lot of people that review the game and say that, well, it got very repetitive or it got very annoying. And I think that in general, there's going to be a lot of people that this game just isn't for, that don't normally play looter shooters or looting games or grinding games in general. If you don't actively play, ARPGs every season or Korean MMOs or Chinese MMOs, where a lot of your time is just repeating the same process over and over, if you don't have a high tolerance for that, then this kind of game isn't going to be for you. So I think as they move into the long term for The First Descendant, they have to try and bolster that and make that part of the process so that when the people start falling off that weren't originally going to stay with the game anyways, fall off, and then the core audience is left, they're able to keep the core audience happy. And I would say in general, this game has a very strong foundation as related to very, close competitors to its game. I think the closest resemblance is probably that it looks and feels like Destiny, but the meat and bones is actually more like Warframe, just how the process goes of collecting characters, upgrading characters, prestiging them to make them stronger, and facing off against harder and harder content to see how strong you can actually get. And I think that the crux of games like this, in general PvE games, comes down to how much content you can add to it regularly and the staying power of that content overall. One of the hardest parts about making a PvE focused game is that you're ultimately against AI or against computer NPC opponents, which can be easily outsmarted and in many cases can be outbeaten or out-tricked in many ways with the builds that you bring. There are people that are running Glay builds that one-shot bosses in a single hit, all kinds of builds with like Lepic or Blair that can blow it up in a single phase, and all of these kind of trivialize the process of getting stronger and stronger as you're playing The First Descendant. So realistically, I think over the next quarter, over the next 3 months as we move into the fall for The First Descendant, I think they really need to start ramping up their content pipeline. Realistically, they needed to have ramped it up already at the beginning of the year before launch to start regularly introducing brand new characters, ultimate characters, and new encounters. And we've seen over the roadmap that they have promised that every, 2 to 3 months, they will be getting a brand new ultimate character, which essentially is a slightly improved version of one of the existing characters, a new Colossus to add to that list, as well as a brand new champion, a brand new descendant to add to the list as well, which will help keep the game flourishing and give people reasons to play, which is really good. And I think they can even probably increase the pipeline for the encounters to be even faster than that. I think 4 new dungeons and 4 new Colossi a year isn't going to be enough for a game like this. I would like to see it be even faster, maybe 6-week cycles for those to make that even more interesting, because ultimately the Colossi get mastered quite quickly, the dungeons themselves get mastered quite quickly. It does coincide with the release of characters, releasing new materials to farm and things to play from, but from that standpoint, I think they really need to keep the pacing going on content, because PvE content can get consumed extremely fast by people that are playing these kind of games, especially once they figure out what build they're going for and get really strong. The next thing I want to talk about is quality of life, and I think this is something that is going to be a mortality rate for a game like this. My personal perspective, and I've been gaming my whole life, is that when you play a grinding game, a game that is designed to eat up your hours while you try to repeatedly accomplish a rare percent chance, like something's going to drop, or you're trying to slowly level something, like I've leveled into the mid-60s in Black Desert. That is a very repetitive process, trying to get very long-term achievements in MMOs, playing all kinds of games where you're just doing the same thing over and over. And I would say the number one thing that you want to focus on in those kinds of games, especially for the people like myself who enjoy grinding to accomplish something over long term, is going to be streamlining the process of doing so. The quality of life is probably one of the most urgent aspects in the First Descendant right now, So let's go through some of the pain points for the game in that category. So the very basis of looter shooters is going to be around you setting a target for something that you want to farm. Either it's going to be a low drop rate, something you want to craft by collecting enough materials, or some kind of target you're aiming for. And I think this is what grind games are all about, is setting some far off distant goal and working towards it every day until you eventually have it. However, there's definitely some pain points in the First Descendant right now. So if you press G and go to access info, you can see all the items in the game and you can figure out where they come from. So you can, if you're trying to farm a specific weapon, you can look at that weapon and then you can figure out where all the pieces come from. And there are time gating issues in the game right now. So some of these require like 2 to 4 hours to craft. You have to craft all of the individual pieces, then you can eventually craft the weapon, and the weapon takes 4 hours. Characters can take upwards of 16 plus hours or more to finish once you finally get all the drops. And some of the drops can be very rare or difficult to achieve. However, you know, and this is not unusual. Many of its competitors do this as well. So I wouldn't say this has no precedent, but there's definitely going to be situations where you're trying to farm something specific, right? You want to get something specific. It'll tell you all the places that it comes from, but then there's layers of farming that comes from that as well. So if you have something called a void fusion reactor, those void fusion reactors are encounters that you will spawn and fight a monster. And then once you fight the monster, it will spawn a loot chest that you have to open. But in order to open the loot chest, you have to have another material called an amorphous material to put into the loot chest and then open it using the loot chest. So we go to the first screen and you have to find out where you opened the item that you collected. You go to the location, you put that item in, but if you don't have any of that item, you have to go to a different location to find that item, and that item has a chance of dropping in many places as well. So you have to have these drop rates upon drop rates upon drop rates, and I think that there's a big issue right now with the overall UI and portrayal of this, because if I want that specific item and I click on this, you lose your scope and location in the menu. So you think, okay, well, I go here to do this, but what am I going here to get this from? Sometimes on the missions, they don't show all the items that they drop. They don't even show the drop rates on it. Some of the things that you get in the game will just say mission monster on them. And what that means is that you don't get it from completing the mission. There's all these different kind of vessels that carry the items you're looking for in the game, whether it's completing a mission, defeating a boss, opening an amorphous material, or just random drops from monsters in that area, generally for shrug. And I think that is part of where this comes from that makes this even weirder. So you can click on this, it tells you if you do this mission or this dungeon, there's a mission monster drop for this item. You don't know what percent that is, you don't know which monsters drop it, you just have to keep running it over and over until you get it. And I feel like they could make this a lot clearer and that process a lot easier. You could also redesign this menu for having items or descendants or pieces that you're trying to farm and make it very clear in one click the item that you're looking for as the end result, the loot chest item drop that it creates, and where the item that loot chest requires comes from, all in one screen, and you can click and mark different items very easily, rather than have these very simplistic kind of text-based nested menus where you click on it and then all of a sudden you need this extra item, but you can't go back to the screen you were just on, because if you back up, it closes it, which means you have to reopen the blueprint. So we get the blueprint from this place, which we need this amorphous material to get from. And I feel like in a game where it's expecting you to spend hours upon hours upon hours grinding something, it is paramount that the process of grinding is extremely streamlined. It's very fluid, it's very direct, it's very easy. When you have 90 minutes after work to grind, you can jump on, you have a straight path, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna grind and see if it drops. If it doesn't, oh well. If it does, that's great. But I think that the process of figuring out what you're trying to farm, where it comes from, how to get there and get it, and what the percent chance you get it from is very messed up right now in the UI, and the process of looking it up in the menu as well. I also think that the location for certain things can be streamlined as well. And I think that from this, you can actually mark targets. So like if you wanted to farm something specific, you can mark it as like, hey, I want to farm this, right? So you can press U, it marks it and adds it to a list here at the bottom. I think it would be great and super nice for a game like this if you could mark a bunch of items and then there was like some kind of rotating queue. You could like queue your daily queue or some kind of roulette or something like that, or just like a rotating random queue, and it would actually just queue you for all the activities that all your marked items have. And so you can just set your target for the day, go in and grind. It would put you in with missions that other players have so that you're, you know, grouping with players, you're instilling in the co-op experience. But again, it's streamlined. You get on, you spend as much uptime, like it should be like as high uptime as possible on you grinding the fun parts and actually playing the game, and as minimal as possible you navigating menus, trying to find items, listening to obscure tooltips that don't explain everything, getting really confused and frustrated. It should just be so, you know, focused on quality of life and streamlined for you to figure out exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that that is primarily where a lot of the frustration exists now for people that are playing the game or don't normally play these kind of games. Is it's not necessarily that some items are hard to get or hard to acquire. It's not only that some items take time, it's more that the feedback that you're getting as you're progressing towards it is next to none. And also figuring out, like, the process of deciding what you're going to farm and how you're going to get there and farm it is so convoluted and obstructed right now that I think it makes the process of going through and waiting and working towards those goals a little bit more frustrating than it needs to be. And I think that that needs to be a high priority fix for them on their list, at least hopefully this calendar year. The next thing I think is a huge opportunity for the First Descendant that will help it stand out where it sits right now in the gaming industry is going to be around focusing on the characters. I think that gacha RPGs do this exceptionally well. Some MMOs and JRPGs do this exceptionally well. And I think that if they want to play off of this Warframe style looter shooter class-based character-based game, I think they need to start adding in more like character chapters. Currently there is a minimal story chapter that you can complete for one of their premier characters, Bunny, that you see on screen right now, but I think that they need to have a lot more investment in those characters. We need to get to know those characters, more high cost cutscenes like this so you can actually learn about their background and start to love them and connect with them. And that's what's going to help these kind of character-based games grow and flourish, because then they can attach to the character they're grinding for in order to create that bond. So like, I really want to get this character because I like them so much and I want to make them stronger and I want to test out all these builds, and I'm happy to grind all these different moments and experience all the strengths that they have and the different builds and play styles that they can actually implement when I'm trying to go through this grinding process. And I don't think they need to make it super complicated or super convoluted in the character stories. In general, I think the main story for the First Descendant is pretty awful. It's entirely generic. It feels like it was AI written in some cases, super basic. A lot of the dialogue is incredibly basic and simple. There's not really a whole lot that was like impressive to me other than the fidelity and the cutscene quality for the characters and for the scenes, but the story itself is not super fleshed out, and I think they didn't really need it to be. We have bad guys that we're trying to stop, and we have good guys that we're trying to work with in order to create a better galaxy for everyone else. It doesn't need to be more complicated for that. There's always going to be more enemies in a looter shooter that we're trying to mow down to create peace in the universe as the Emperor intended. But in this case, I think they really need to make the character progression and the character stories a lot more fleshed out so that we can connect to them and actually have that kind of bond. The next thing that's worth talking about is easing restrictions and giving more freedom and access to players. As it stands right now, especially in a grind-based game, I think there's far too many restrictions and limitations for the characters and for the players that over time is going to start grating on them and probably cause them to drop out from the game or just turn over as a player because they just didn't get what they were looking for. The first and easiest to talk about is going to be slot extensions, either for storage, consumables, your items, as well as weapons. And of course, the big one is going to be Descendant slots. As of right now, you have a base given slot count of 10. You can collect and craft 10 characters. All the characters in the game are craftable for free if you put in the time and effort to do it. And then you can also expand those slots by spending the premium currency. I am on the fence about this one because I think that the devs have to make money somehow, and so having some restrictions here is a big part of it. I think if they want to keep the limitation where you have to spend money to expand your slots for Descendants, it would be nice if they had some kind of like stowaway system where you can put a Descendant away and take one out of storage and put it out, and that way if you're free to play, you can still have that limitation for the storage itself. But there's also silly limitations that feel kind of weird, especially if you're making lots of different builds, that you can mark items for favorite. Like, you can favorite it so that it doesn't get auto-dismantled or auto-destroyed when you're playing the game. This is huge for looter games, so you can mark the items that you want to keep using in the future so they don't get destroyed. You can keep using them. However, there's a soft limit on how many items you can mark for favorite. And when you hit the limit, you can't mark any for favorite. It doesn't even come close to the max storage limit that you have. And so you get to the point where, like, I've been marking items that I want to keep and test out, and then I stopped doing it because I hit the limit and couldn't mark anymore for favorite. There's also a limit on crafting as well. You can only have a certain number of things crafting at once, and once you hit that limit, even though you have more things that you could craft, you have to wait until they're done in order to craft more. Now, you can spend premium currency to accelerate the process, so it again is a microtransaction monetization scheme for them so that they can make money. So if you wanted to finish something quicker, you get the benefit of using that premium currency. You can free up a crafting slot, but I feel like they could very easily double the crafting slots and still have that same benefit of being able to use that there without restricting player usage too much. And I also think it's non-negotiable. I don't know why this isn't in the game now, but I think it definitely should be. It's kind of silly that it's not in the game right now. You have all of these different characters in the game that require anywhere from a full days of gameplay of grinding, like 8+ hours, to multiple days or even a week or more to grind out for free in order to unlock that character and play it. And also on top of that, in the store itself, you have these characters that you can pick up, these packs that you can spend money on in order to unlock and get the character as well. And there's also a training room where you can go in and use your unlocked characters and weapons to test them out. However, there is no way to test characters you don't currently own, and I think that is a massive miss for them. If you're going to either A, spend your money your money to unlock these characters, or B, you're going to spend a large amount of time farming them to unlock them, I think it is perfectly reasonable to allow us to test out the characters so that we can actually see which ones we like, mess around with them, try them, at least in this confined space where we already have this training room where you can play out different weapons and gear. Why not let us try out different Descendants so we can see what they feel like, see what they look like, see what they how they play, so that we can actually decide whether we want to get them or not. And that's where I'm at with the First Descendant. I think the game has a lot of potential, and if the devs can keep up with the demands of the player base, polish the game, get lots of quality of life, plus tons and tons and tons of new content on a regular schedule, I think this can definitely solidify at a good 50 to 80,000 CCU and stay that way for a very long time as they kind of play out that dream of the high fidelity looter shooter that people really enjoy. It's got some love that needs to be put into it, some polishing, some performance issues that need to be sorted out, and a lot more content that needs to be added, and some quality of life that will make the experience of grinding this hard to get the items that you're looking for a lot better. But I think that the ball is in their court right now as a live service game to figure out if they can actually make that happen for their fans and for the player base in the First Descendant. And that's how I feel right now. I like the game, but it's promising, but it's got some issues that it's got to work through, at least in the short term. So we'll see how that goes. Let me know what you think about the First Descendant, if you're enjoying it or if you don't play it at all, and why, down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.